Welcome to Medical Marijuana and Wellness. Today's topic is Schedule 3 and the Cannabis Administration and Opportunities Act. We are right now facing in the United States a lot of movement in the cannabis world to be able to have cannabis become legal, not only from a state standpoint, but also federally. Schedule 3 is a federal classification, and the process has started to be able to have cannabis be legal federally. We're going to talk about that. And helping me with this is Amy Green, an RN with MMTC. Amy, welcome.
Always wonderful to be here. Thank you.
You work with a lot of patients, and this is becoming a bit of a hot topic, isn't it?
It really is. And mostly I'm having a lot of patients that are just unsure or confused about what's actually going on. And so hopefully we can clear some of that up today.
Sure. And that's why we put together this particular webinar to talk about what's going on the state level. Let me back up just a bit and talk a little about what's been happening, because really what we're talking about is we're talking about a comprehensive review by the HHS, and then also look at the DEA getting involved, being able to reclassify this. And on May 21st, the Justice Department actually went out and proposed what they call an NPRM, that is a notice of proposed rulemaking to reschedule cannabis from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. Tell us a little bit about that process, Amy, and also the fact that this doesn't make cannabis legal, but what it does is it sets the framework to make it legal.
Correct. Yeah. So, the DOJ sent that notice. You're totally right. It did not make cannabis legal. All it did was begin the arduous process of different government agencies contributing their research and their recommendations for the scheduling of it. So it doesn't mean it instantly kicks in and we have Schedule 3. It means that we are starting that process to make that change.
Right. And that really started on May 21st, which I think is a major step. This is a major breakthrough in having cannabis become legal in the United States. Now, one of the keys is what they call the Controlled Substances Act. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Certainly. So the Controlled Substances Act is controlled by the DEA, and it actually classifies medications and drugs based on their medicinal value and their potential for abuse. According to the DEA, abuse is when an individual takes a substance recreationally and develops personal health hazards or poses other risks to society as a whole. If a drug cannot be abused, the drug is not assigned to Schedule.
Right. And let's talk a little about the schedule, because this is important. Right now, cannabis is classified as Schedule 1, which means it has no acceptable medical use, which we know is not true, hence why a lot of the movement right now and pressure to be able to reschedule it. But Schedule 3 also, it allows us to take and put it in the category of things like Tylenol, codeine, testosterone shots. Tell us a little bit about that rescheduling, because that's really important, not only just because it allows us to have a different classification, but it opens up a lot of doors for things like research.
Yeah, certainly. So, as a Schedule 1 drug, cannabis has been extremely hard for both public and private entities to be able to study on a large scale. And a lot of that is the sourcing of cannabis, because as a Schedule 1 drug, it's considered to have no medicinal value and high potential for abuse. And so the government is reluctant to have studies done on this potential, what they view as a highly addictive and non-medicine based drug. So by rescheduling it to Schedule 3, we're hoping to have a lot more research, and we're hoping to open up a lot of different areas that are currently not being well served with it being under Schedule 1. That includes banking, research, and other different parts of the cannabis actual industry.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about the process and what's going to come out of this. I think this is important. I know that Congress really has the ability today to pass legislation to reschedule cannabis. However, what they've done is they've asked the DEA to really make the recommendation, and hence why the Attorney General has initiated the review process to be able to reschedule this drug. But take me through the steps to make this happen.
Certainly. So it's a little bit like watching a bill go through Congress. Everything has layers and steps. So it starts out with the DEA and the Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS. They've started a public review period. They've already received over 30,000 comments in that review period. And then from there, the DEA requests the HHS review the medical and scientific evidence regarding a drug's current schedule. At that point, HHS through the FDA evaluates the drug and its schedule through an analysis based on 8 factors. Among those factors, you have a drug's potential for abuse, the scientific evidence for a drug's pharmacological effects, and then the scientific evidence for a drug's medical use. At that point, HHS recommends a schedule based on that scientific evidence that they've gathered. And then the DEA conducts its own review of that scientific information. And with the HHS determination in mind, it sets the final schedule. So this is layers of government agencies that are all going to be working together to see this through.
And I think it's important to point out that this process can take between 18 to 24 months. And by the way, it started in May of this year. Now, it's important to point out that the DEA's next meeting is going to be in December of this year. And what they're doing in December is they are going to be setting a set of meetings to lead to that final schedule. So they're setting up a meeting to have more meetings. And this is really part of the whole process to take place. So I want to set everybody's expectations. This process will take 2 years. It's going to be 2026 before we'll see anything really come out the other end to make cannabis legal. But the process has started, and this is very, very important to have the federal agencies on board to be able to reschedule cannabis. Now, let's talk a little bit about the implications of this, because if we reschedule cannabis, it really helps in a lot of different areas. Can you take me through a lot of these? Because starting with tax, this is really important.
Absolutely. So, one of the big things that we see right now is cannabis businesses in the US are not able to take advantage of certain business deductions that would be allowed for other businesses because of the restrictive nature of Schedule 1. So that is putting a huge tax burden on these cannabis companies. Additionally, many cannabis companies operate as cash only businesses and they don't have the support or the ability to use banking services, meaning that they're not able to get loans through a bank and they're not able to process any of their funds through a bank. Hopefully, with this change, it will prompt federal regulatory agencies like the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network to issue updated guidance for banks on marijuana related businesses. Next, we have research. Under Schedule 1, again, research is very limited into cannabis in the US. Under Schedule 3, we would have a lot more research potential for cannabis, both large and small entities, public and private, and it would open up the ability for large scale clinical trials that we need to really prove the efficacy and safety of cannabis. And then finally, federal and state laws, the rescheduling of marijuana does not, so the rescheduling of marijuana as Schedule 3 is a federal decision and it doesn't directly impact states' cannabis laws as they're written right now, including adult use, medical use, CBD or low THC cannabis programs.
But what it really does is it sets the stage to legalize those programs that are in place, because a lot of states that have made this legal, it's been a bit of borderline, although there's been um, statements made by the DOJ that they're not going to prosecute. This removes that barrier and allows the states to have a clear uh, guidance and a clear field to be able to have a state medical marijuana program. And I think that's very, very important. Now let's talk a little bit about the fact that, so now we have these federal agencies, the DEA, FDA, all these folks, HHS falling into place, but that doesn't make cannabis legal. In order to make cannabis legal, we need to have congressional legislation to change all the laws. Tell us a little bit about that, because really the CAOA needs to be updated to have a legal framework to protect the public.
Absolutely. Yeah, because as of right now, all of our federal laws regarding cannabis are extremely limiting and punitive. So we do need to see changes in federal legislation regarding cannabis as cannabis is rescheduled from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. The CAOA is really focusing on public health, safety, and prioritizing restorative and economic justice to help undo decades of harm caused by the failed war on drugs. So the provision also seeks to end discrimination in federal benefits based on cannabis use. It provides major investments for cannabis research, and it would strengthen worker protections.
Right. So this is an important piece. So in order to have cannabis be legal here in the United States, we need not only the agencies to be rescheduled or to reschedule it, but also we need this act to be put in place. And let's be real candid. I'll quote the New York Times. They basically came out and said that this bill is unlikely to become law, primarily because right now it doesn't have enough, uh, especially in the House, does not have enough people in favor of it. It is, however, a major step from the standpoint that the top leadership, especially in the Senate and the finance committees, have now recognized the importance of cannabis and has exactly introduced this particular legislation. Now, I'm not going to be political, but I am going to say this legislation was proposed by Democratic senators Booker, Schumer, and Wyden. The GOP is firmly against this particular bill. Now, this bill is been introduced and probably won't come up for vote until after the next election. And I think that's something really important to point out because the process for changing or making law changes in order to have cannabis be legal in the United States has formally started. It's important to to point that out. And as we mentioned earlier, the federal agencies are now aligning their policies for Schedule 3. Public hearings are taking place. It's important that congressional legislation be put in place for this particular process. Amy, tell us about timing because I think we need some patience here. It's going to take a little while.
Absolutely. As we know fairly well as U.S. citizens, government moves slowly as this has to proceed through several different government agencies, HHS, FDA, DEA, and through Congress. We don't foresee this happening next week. We are looking at a schedule or a timeline of years, not weeks or months for this to be implemented. So just be patient, and the process has started. It's just going to be a slow process, though.
Yeah, and I think although on one side we're asking for patience, because it is going to take, it's going to be until 2026. It is happening, and it will happen, and we will see movement of this in 2026, which is going to be really important. The key, however, is in November. It's important that the congressional election will have a huge impact on the passage of this. If the current House situation stays in place, this will not pass. We will not have cannabis legal in the United States. So it's critical to vote for congressional representatives who are in favor of cannabis. And that's really key. It doesn't make any difference if they're Democratic, Republican, Independent, whatever. As long as they're favorable towards cannabis, that's what we're looking for. And I recommend looking for congressional representatives that are going to do that if you, in fact, want cannabis to be legal here in the United States. Your thoughts on that, Amy?
Yeah, I recommend doing your research on your representatives before making a vote so that you have the most information possible to make a vote and decision that aligns with your values and beliefs.
So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Amy, do you have any final comments?
As always, I recommend using a treatment journal when you're starting any new medication or cannabis product, and start low, go slow. You can always take more, you just can't take less than you already took. And of course, I support voting, so please get out and vote.
I totally agree with that. I do want to point out we have other webinars coming this particular quarter. This month we're talking about the legal landscape. Next quarter we're talking about marijuana basics, including terminology, how can I use cannabis without smoking, understanding cannabis as medicine, and also how it affects people individually, why it affects people individually. And then of course in November we're talking about a lot of wellness products. So please join us. Don't forget to check in and to like and subscribe our YouTube channel at Marijuana Aware. And then also feel free to check in and join any of our webinars on marijuanaaware.com for our weekly webinar series. Thank you very much for joining us, and we hope this will help you understand how to get your life back.